that we can live happily now, in a great big old roomy house, and I know you're gonna groove me, baby. Oh yeah, now make me feel good.
Morning, everybody. Welcome. Please enjoy some music. We'll get started shortly. If you want to chat us in the chat box, let us know who's on our call today. We would love to hear from y'all.
In the house. Besides Crystal.
Yes. Group thing today.
Oh, snap. Snap. I'm sorry. The Snap, the organization is here. Awesome. Oh, Noah's Project. Hey, welcome. Kathleen. Purple Door, yes. I love that name. I just saw this movie the other night that the song came on. Babysitters, Adventures in Babysitting. They love that movie.
Those 80s movies, this is one of my favorites. Door staff.
Hey. Nice, Stephanie. Pam. Good to see you. Glad you're here. I agree, Amanda. Oh, yay! Bear County. Welcome. Bear County PA's off. Great.
Wait a couple more minutes. We have about half of the people who registered already logged in, and sometimes people run just a little late to get the technology going.
We've got good music to keep us busy. Oh, yay! New friends, new life. Hey. Welcome.
Any other anti-trafficking organizations or people who work with anti-trafficking people on the call today?
New Hampshire.
Mhm.
Welcome, New Hampshire. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is some old stuff, y'all. But I love it.
So if you want to add this to your playlist, this is the Feeling Good, and it's FEELIN apostrophe good playlist over at Spotify. So they have an amazing playlist. It's long and versatile and all sorts of great stuff. So if you're a Spotify user, check that out.
Families, welcome. Morning. Oh, Fort Worth PD. All right. Well, yay. Fort Worth PD is here. It's great.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty good number of people on the call, and some people might come in just a little late. Today's presentation is the state of, I have my non-stranger sexual assault in Texas. This is a presentation that Rose and I have done before. We started this at a regional meeting a few years back, and it's something that we enjoy presenting, and we keep it open in terms of regional meetings or bringing it to your community. Hopefully when COVID is somewhat different and we can start meeting again in person, you're welcome to contact us and have us bring this out to an event that you might be hosting. So just a few housekeeping things before we get into the content for today. This webinar is being recorded. We do put those webinars up on our YouTube channel. It's been taking a little bit longer because we've had a little bit of some glitches with editing, but it looks like we have that fixed and they're getting up a little bit faster. But if you haven't checked it out lately, go to TAASA's YouTube page. We have lots of great webinars up through the end of last year. So we're not offering any participation certificates or CEUs for these webinars. We are working on those. We hope to offer those again soon. If you have any questions about training or technical support, anything related to webinars in general, please get a hold of me, Garcia at taasa.org. And then I will go ahead and turn this over to Rose.
All right. Well, welcome again, everybody. Thank you, Crystal, for reminding us or reminding me too on the housekeeping for the webinars. But happy Friday, y'all. Oh my God. Thank y'all for joining us on a Friday. I know a lot of people are like, you know what? I'd rather have my 3-day weekend. I totally get that, but I appreciate you all joining us this Friday. And so it was really fun to see the folks that are here. A lot of folks we're very familiar with, but for those of you who are not familiar with TAASA, we are the statewide coalition, basically committed to ending sexual assault. I know that sounds really lofty, but as you see on the screen, our mission is unifying the voice to eliminate sexual violence in Texas. And as the statewide coalition of rape crisis centers, advocates, survivors, and allied professionals, sorry, I need to update that. We are committed to fostering a culture that respects the fundamental rights and dignity of all in Texas, Texans and all in Texas. You can be a Texan or not. If you're in Texas, you're covered. So move on to the next one. Oops. How do I move to the next slide? I'm sorry, I don't see the button.
Are y'all seeing the slideshow view? Because it looks like it froze, so I might need to restart this. Hold on just a second.
It's the music and
music. Okay. So. All right, today's session, this webinar is going to explore the staggering difference between adult and child survivors' conviction rates and the controversial outcomes of some adult non-stranger rape cases in Texas. So we are going to be focusing on those particular slides. Hold on. I see all your slides on the left. Okay, let me exit this real quick. It froze on the screen, so we're gonna have to. Rose and I practiced this and practiced this and practiced this, and it worked. So
Mercury in retrograde. Something's happening. We were
you
like,
know,
we
it
got
never
it.
fails. Gotta wait for the PowerPoint to do its thing.
While y'all are waiting, here's my cat Tilly. My coworker. It's so cute because if I were to show you a picture of my cat Tilly, she looks just like this. But isn't this the cutest little thing? For those of you who like cats, so I keep her right here, so y'all can see her, and I can. Oops, Tilly. There we go. There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right, so let's keep going with the prevalence of sexual violence in Texas at this time. And I think, Rose, this is your slide.
All right, y'all. So as we start this conversation, what we wanted to do, so we called it like State of the State, and wanted to just to talk about what does this mean? So the conundrum, I know, and I'm so glad that there are some of you that are from police departments. We've got a lot of you that are from advocacy organizations, like our membership organizations, sexual assault programs or crisis centers. Also some human trafficking. So excited about that. And I also saw a few from DA's offices. So the big question is, y'all, and we'll start kind of building up the topic, but the big question that I want us to keep in our minds is how do we, and we'll talk about this later, but how do we connect the issue of adult non-stranger sexual assault and justice, right? Survivor justice and justice as a whole, the criminal justice system. Because, I think if I was to go out there and do a poll and say, who thinks sexual assault is horrible and there should be some accountability, I would say maybe not 100%. There's probably one or, there's always one or two little knuckleheads out there, but probably 99% of the time, folks are going to say, yes, that's a horrible thing. And we want some accountability. But the reality is, for adult non-stranger sexual assault, that's not what we're seeing in regards to the criminal justice system. And we'll talk a little bit later about what we're all doing on a statewide level, some exciting things that we're doing on a statewide level to begin to peel back the layers on how we can address that. But I just kind of wanted to kind of set that stage as in your mindset, like what they're not meshing, and I'm not sure why. We're going to find out. But that's kind of like the premise that I wanted you all to think about as I'm talking about this. So we'll start by just the sheer prevalence of sexual assault in Texas. So we're very lucky that in Texas, we have the Institute on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault who have Texas stats. Before that, we were having to rely on just national stats. I trust the statisticians and all the research entities, but it's really nice when we're able to say, like 6.3 million Texans have experienced some form of sexual assault in their lifetime. So that is one finding. The other is that 2 in 5 Texas women have been sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime as well. And the next is that 1 in 5 Texas men have been sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. So when you look at that as a whole, we have sexual assault that's occurring. The prevalence rate is very, very high. And so I know oftentimes when I talk to folks, they're like, oh, it doesn't happen here. I haven't heard of that happening here. So we have these layers of things that we need to address so that we can really talk about the reality of what this is, so that we can really get to where survivors get the healing and justice that they deserve. Also, another stat that we found is that 1 rape in Texas occurs every 35 minutes. So by the time we're done with this presentation, again, that's really harsh to think about, but that is the reality of the prevalence of sexual assault in our state. But the good news is that we have folks working on that. You all are working on that on the ground. We're working on it at TAASA. We're also partnering with the governor's office, and I'll talk about that, the sexual task force. So we are moving in the right direction, but I just wanted to, in order for us to really address it, we always have to recognize where we are. And this is the reality. So all right. So next we're going to talk about reporting. Another thing, so if you would have asked advocates all day long, we would have told you reporting rates are low, especially for adult non-stranger. Even when they go to the hospital. I was a hospital accompaniment advocate for a while, so I would do that in Williamson County. And I want to say probably 100% of the time it was somebody they knew. It was at a party. It was a non-stranger or an acquaintance, right? And probably a majority, I can't say about 90 something around what this says, they just didn't want to report. They go to the hospital, they just wanted to make sure that they were okay, medically speaking. And so I was there to let them know, absolutely, here are your options. The options are you can do a forensic, a SANE exam, and here's this. And then separately is just the medical piece. You have your, just to kind of show them, here are your options. And I would say, and well, from my experience, 100% of the time, they did the medical and the forensic, even if they weren't reporting. And that was a really nice option for them. So anyway, here in Texas, over 91% of sexual assault victims do not report to law enforcement. So I'm not going to lay that blame on law enforcement. I'm going to lay that blame on society and the misunderstandings and the misconception about sexual assault. And this, I can't give you the child numbers, just for adults, but for the child numbers are really high as well. If there's any CACs or folks that work with children, we know that children aren't going to come out and say, oh yeah, this happened to me at this time. There's the grooming process. We know how that works. A lot of times they're going to drop hints. It's up to us as adults to pick up on those and move forward with it. But the next one is 90% of child victims are assaulted by someone they know. And we got that stat from the National Children's Alliance. They had some CAC statistics. So that makes sense when you think about the dynamics of child sexual assault. So again, that's the reporting rates. Next, we were going to talk about who are the offenders, right? So what we've seen, and again, the IDVSA studies, they've done two. They did one in 2003, and then they re-upped it again in 2015, I believe, or 2005 and 2013. Either way, about 10 years later. So over 80% of sexual assaults are committed by someone known to the victim. And again, that's something that for those of us that are in this field that work with these with sexual assault survivors, this is the stuff that we just see. So it's really nice to have some research and some evidence to back up our anecdotal claims. And the other thing that we've seen doing this work, especially with adult non-stranger, is that most rapists remain undetected. I just remember, I'll just give you a really quick example of one of the cases that at the hospital that I saw. There was two best friends. They came in, right? And so I was the advocate that was on call. So I went in and I was talking to the one who was sexually assaulted, and her best friend was there with her. And so, they were, before the nurse came in, they disclosed to me what happened. I didn't ask them for that, but I wasn't going to stop them either. So after she told me what happened, and then she's like, oh, I want to go smoke a cigarette. So she went out to smoke a cigarette, the survivor did, and the best friend was there, and she just burst into tears. And I was like, are you okay? What's going on? How can I help you? What did I say? I just didn't know what was going on. And she told me, she said, this is all my fault. He did that to me last year, and I should have said something. This is my fault. I said, I am so sorry that happened to you. And it is not your fault. It is his fault. So again, that's just one example. And again, I thought about the burden that she's going to carry. I was trying to, convince her that it wasn't her fault, because it was not. But all that shows is that was someone who remained undetected, because again, of the misconception and the miscommunication and all those things when it comes to adult non-stranger sexual assault. Also, another stat by RAINN is that 8 of 10 sexual assaults are committed by, again, someone known to the victim. So again, just stats to back up that this is someone they know. So you can imagine the confusion that sexual assault survivors have. Like, I knew this person, I'm not going to be believed. Did it really happen to me? Am I just, just the second guessing that happens with a lot of us. It's just how we are by nature, but when something like this happens, how it solidifies and how it continues that tape that is in your mind. So it's so important, the work that we're all doing to ensure that we get that we help them understand that it was not their fault. This is a very common thing, and your reaction is absolutely normal. So in the next slide. Sorry, I would change it myself, Crystal, but I don't even see a little button.
Yeah, okay.
Button. I sound so old when I say that, button. You know what I mean. Okay, so one of the other things, y'all, that's done this work, and probably you all that are in the law enforcement or even in the DA's offices, you know, one of the misconceptions out there, and I would say I've even heard us as advocates talk about this. We're always talking about the role of alcohol and all that stuff. We do know this. Alcohol is used to facilitate this, right? It's used as a facilitator, but from the outside looking in, you'll say folks say something like, oh, she was confused because they were drunk, or you know, he was drunk and he's just, you know, the misunderstood drunk guy. It wasn't a sexual assault. Well, these are pulled from, Crystal, can you remind me where these were pulled from?
These are from DPS's crime report. So their
DPS,
annual crime report.
the DPS report on those sexual assault offenders. Again, we're not, there's, you know, when we look at the grand scheme of sexual assault, the reporting, so we're looking within the scope of those who reported. When you look at these slides and you look at the who was under the influence, it was not the offender. As you can see in 2017, 86% of those were not under the influence of anything. Only 9.4 were under the influence of alcohol and 4.6 drugs. So again, the narrative that there was this miscommunication because they were drunk, it was drunk sex, it was whatever folks come up with. Again, no fault if anybody's own. We just have some work to do in explaining the reality of this. This reality here is showing us that those who were arrested were not, most of them were not under the influence. And it's year after year. 2017, 86% were not under the influence. 2018, 86 again, 0.9. And then also in 2019. And I guarantee you, when we get to 2020, it'll be just about the same. That trend will continue. So again, if that's one thing, as you're having these conversations, if you're at a sexual assault program or you're, you know, working wherever you work, I think if we can combat the narrative that it was just this drunk situation, that there was a confluence of situations where they were drunk and no one heard the consent and whatever, that is not true. So again, studies, this one and others will have confirmed that the undetected rapist is a serial hunter and a serial offender. The example I gave you earlier was that one friend of theirs, acquaintance of theirs, had raped the one friend the year prior and then came back and raped, you know, the other friend. So this is something that happens again. And it's not that all men, don't take that either. All men are all bad and everybody who works against sexual assault hates them. That's not it. We know that there are good men out there and a lot of good men that are standing up against this narrative and that are helping us with this message. I know Emiliano on staff has this men's project that he's working on that I encourage all of you to learn a little bit, to look into. It's really great information. So again, I don't want anyone to think, oh, you know, oh, you're just that bra burning man hater. That's not it. I mean, I'm not. I haven't burned my bra. I mean, that sounds really fun. I've just never done that. And the truth is that, what do you call it? That again, that narrative is stuck. That's one of those strong misconceptions out there. So I just wanted to kind of showcase through graph, through research, through statistics that that's not the case. And the other harsh reality is that the vast majority of perpetrators will not go to jail or prison. That we know. First of all, they're not reporting. And when they do report, somewhere in the system, whether it's when they report to law enforcement, you know, we've heard of issues, you know, unfortunately, Austin had some issues with the clearance and all that kind of stuff. Again, I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but, you know, there's been some issues maybe at the law enforcement area or maybe it makes it from law enforcement and it gets it to the DA's office, and then somewhere in that process, whether it's in the intake, it didn't go through, or even if it went to grand jury, no bill, whatever the case is. Very few of those, again, from the subset of those that do report, go to prison or jail. So in this particular case, this is out of RAIN. RAIN is a really great national organization that collects a lot of statistics and provides information. But out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 995 perpetrators will walk free. So in Texas, again, just a reminder, over 90% of sexual assault was not reported to law enforcement. So again, we're talking about a small subset when we're talking about in Texas. And again, not law enforcement's issue. It's a bigger thing that we all should, that we're all going to work together to try to combat. But this is probably the harshest reality. I know when I'm sitting in the hospital room, and I remember most of them don't want to report. I mean, that's been my experience. I'm not going to speak for all. I'm just speaking from my experience when I was in the exam room as a sexual assault advocate from the sexual assault program in Williamson County, that most just did not want to report. They just want to move on. They just want to get over it. They want to make sure their body is okay. They want the health care, but they just want to try to forget this. And of course, we try to keep in touch with them to work with healing. Absolutely going to respect whatever they want to do. Our job is to provide their options. But I do remember one case where one was like, I want him to go to prison. I can't wait till he goes to prison. And that was really hard for me to be able to manage the expectations at a time when I know it's critical for this person who is in this area. So those were always really tricky conversations, but I always tried really hard to manage those expectations and just to reiterate that we were here. The sexual assault program, there's one here. We're here for you, and we will help you every step of the way, however that goes. So again, just really harsh reality there.
All right. So now we're going to get into some deeper analysis. A lot of the statistics that we've been talking about and some of the data that we've been looking at might not be new information for everybody that's calling in today. But the next piece of this is where we're going to really narrow down and look at this difference that we're seeing, this place where we stop looking at survivors across the lifespan as all vulnerable, as all in need of our hard work and our dedication. And somewhere in there, and I've always argued it's about mid-teens, when people, aren't as cute and sweet anymore, there becomes a huge discrepancy. So for us in Texas, the way we split this is we're going to look at child sexual assault. So that's 0 to 18, and then 18 and over. So this first slide I'm about to show you, Rose and I have had a few years to sit with this data, and it still makes my stomach drop. Like, it still is so hard to look at, but there's a huge discrepancy. It's very difficult to find convictions. That data is very difficult to find, but we have been able to look that up through DPS, and they actually provide convictions in a report for concealed handgun carriers. And so they have to compare total convictions with people who are licensed to carry firearms. But it's the only place where it's reported. And so if you're writing grants or you're wanting to do any of this kind of analysis for your own research or agency purposes, you have to go outside of the traditional crime report to actually find this particular data. So we've compiled that for y'all, and so I want y'all to just, not even before I even get into explaining this, chat out your initial response to this. And you see data for the last 5 years before I explain anything, and just your initial view of this. Many of the cases get reduced. Yeah, we've seen that a lot. When I worked at the local level, I saw that for many, many years. So it's very difficult to track the convictions. Anybody else have any just visual responses to this? It's terrible. Yeah. Frustrating, awful. Yes, frustrating. That's one that hits me too. Why the huge peak in 2009? One of the things I did notice through all the crime reports that we review, reporting as a whole is starting to come up, and convictions as a whole is starting to come up. There hasn't necessarily been a change in incidents, which is the number of new cases we're seeing. Sexual assault is actually down in terms of the number of offenses, but conviction rates are still staggeringly different. What you're seeing here is actually data for the last 5 years. Just for sexual assault convictions alone, we've never convicted more than 336 cases in Texas. Now, I've narrowed this down. There's some other offenses and things like that in the reports, but for this kind of learning purposes, it gets overwhelming if we put too much stuff. So I narrowed these specific analysis to sexual assault convictions versus child sexual assault. So children are often considered not good witnesses. Most difficult cases to prove in court. Least likely cases for defendant to want to accept a plea. It's easier to instill fear in children.
Crystal, you know what when I'm looking at this again, you know, like you and I, we feel like a dagger in the heart every time we see the different types of stats and kind of analyze them. But like, so yes, there's a difference between the adult, you know, convictions and child convictions, but just the sheer, it's low even for child. Like this, we're talking about a huge state of Texas. The numbers are low for children too, is what I'm saying, and it's even lower for adults. So again, we're, you know, I've got some work to do, and we're, as all the comments that the folks are saying, it's really hard. So again, this is not placing blame on any. We're not saying, oh, the DAs aren't doing their jobs, law enforcement. This is just here it is. All of us have a role, but this is just the outcomes, right? This is the outcomes that we're seeing that are very heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a reflection of the work, like Rose said. It's as a whole, and we're going to get into some of that and some of the thinking that contributes to that across the board. Juries, us at work, our partners and allies, our stakeholders, all of us are kind of subjected to some poor thinking that also contributes. But all the points that I'm making, there is a difference. There's a difference in these particular cases, right? And now we're going to move on, and the other comparison that we're going to look at over the last 5 years is the aggravated sexual assaults. So often we look at these as more dangerous, more. So what we see here are three areas where they actually measure convictions: child aggravated sexual assault, adult aggravated sexual assault, and then aggravated sexual assault on an elderly or disabled person. So this person is classified in and of itself because these people have significantly more barriers to actually reporting. We're talking about people that could potentially have mobility issues, be wheelchair bound or care bound in a care setting, people that have dementia, people that need a little bit more protection. So they do track all three of these when it comes to aggravated. So.
Crystal, there was a question. Renee says, she says, when you say people who were convicted, are you referring to just child sexual assault cases? Because I see adults, I'm having trouble. I think Renee was referring to the other graph, and and I could just, I don't know if you're referring to the comment maybe that I made, but I was going to say what I meant, what I was trying to convey in that prior graph was that the child sexual assaults, although they're higher than the adults as a whole, are still, seem to me, very low still with the number of people we have in this state. And we're looking.
And one of the things that I still like, just as the researcher in me, still wants to compare like reported offenses, arrests, and then actual convictions, because I think that would be a staggering difference too, where we'd see a very sharp decrease in the number of offenses and the actual outcomes. So and it would consistently match up with a lot of the other data that we've seen for what's going on in Texas. So again, just the discrepancy here. In 2009, again, reporting and conviction consistently up across the board, but we're still seeing a huge discrepancy in outcomes. So
And if you all are interested, there is a state auditor's report that just came out. That's some work. And again, I'll talk about the governor's office sexual assault survivor task force. But it is public. And maybe if I can, I may try to put it in the chat while Crystal's. But it's really interesting. Like Crystal said, she would like to connect the dots on reporting to how it goes through the system. And the one thing that they did point out that it was really hard to do that with how we have things now, but we are working to try to, we're going to try to work to make those dots connect a little bit more. But it's the state auditor's report. The Texas legislature had ordered that report. I believe it was through HB 8. I might be wrong on that, which is the Lavinia Masters Act. I believe that's where it was, if I don't quote me. But either way, somewhere it was a very great thing. So the good news is that we were able to kind of like, here's where we are, and it's it's only up from there. So it's the state auditor's report, final report. If I can't find it to put in the chat, you might. Oh, Nicole.
Always saving us.
Yay. So yeah, when you just want some little pleasure, light reading, I mean, something else to read. But it would help explain a lot of things, and it just gets us to that point where we know our starting point where we are. Thank you, Nicole.
And so I like to start with data, and then I like to move into this conversation about perfect victims. And this is actually, it's something that's been around. It's something that's been a concept a lot of advocates have had and worked with and been a part of. They just haven't quite known what to call it or what to name it. Maybe those conversations were happening in silos over here, this rape crisis center in Amarillo, this rape crisis center down in South Texas, this rape crisis center in Cleveland. And really, over the last few years, we've started talking about this a lot more. It really started getting like traffic in terms of having a name around the time we started seeing Bill Cosby going to trial, Harvey Weinstein going to trial, and then with the Me Too movement. So this is a product of that, but it's something we've always been able to conceptualize as people who work with survivors of sexual violence. This is the idea that there is a right way to behave before, during, and after an incident of sexual violence. So you have this list, and it's almost methodical in a checklist of certain way. It's reinforced through media, television, and film, news reports about sexual assault, social media, and unfortunately, it's also highly reinforced by us who do the work. Often we see stories in our media campaigns, in our fundraising events that are almost voyeuristic in nature, that exploit the scariest parts of sexual assault. Now we as a movement are learning more about that. We're learning how to better tell our stories. We're learning how to better take care of our survivors who might volunteer to tell their story during a fundraising event and stuff like that. So I think there's also some accountability the more we've learned about this perfect victim. But often this reinforces some very, very rigid standards. Race. We often see our perfect victim as someone who is a cisgendered white female. And I've heard this stated in many, many different ways of we have the right case, like we have the right case. Or I've also heard it presented by some victim advocates as that client you really want to get in there and help. And it sounds motivational, it sounds nice, but then you really deconstruct that and you're like, whoa, hold on. That also means there are clients we don't want to get in there and help. And what does that mean about us? What does that in terms of our level of burnout, our level of excitement and hope to keep coming to work, our level of being jaded, our personal biases? Like, what does that mean for us if we're starting to feel that way? And how do we need to do some work on ourselves to correct that? This is also reinforced through race. It's reinforced through appearance. A really great example of this, I'm in a running group. It's a plus size running group. And during COVID, when we first started having to stay at home a lot more, a lot of people were posting articles about how to keep running outside safely. Because, movement is such a big, big, big part of these particular running groups. And somewhere along the line, somebody posted an article, very sincere. I don't think they meant any harm from it. Like, they truly didn't know what they were saying, about a person who had been sexually assaulted while on an outdoor run. Now, I've done enough memorial runs. I'm tired of doing memorial runs for survivors who have been attacked while moving. We have the right to move anywhere we want, run anywhere we want. But this person genuinely wanted help to know what they could do to keep this from happening to them. Someone posted back, I have never thought about being raped. I assume because I'm fat, that just can't happen to me. And watching these people, and there was lots of great people that jumped on and tried to help, but changing that internal narrative of all people could be harmed was very, very difficult for these people. Like you could tell they had kind of built this idea around the perfect victim, and it was just to kind of keep themselves safe, right? Which in truth, and we know, and we work with survivors after the fact to work through that trauma of there's no right way or wrong way to be. And it's not your fault. Like you didn't invite this in any way, shape, or form. Another really great example, if I never, ever see a conversation about leggings being pants or leggings being an invitation to sexually assault someone or comment on somebody's body, I will be very happy, very, very happy person. Like leggings are not an invitation to rape. Bad fashion is not an invitation to rape. Bad fashion is subjective. Like what I might like, Rose might not. So put clothes on your body that make you feel amazing, right? So but we still really reinforce this. Another great example from media is in the inaugural episode, the pilot episode of Grey's Anatomy, which is old now. I realize I've been watching it for a few years. The first person that they kind of operate on is a survivor. She was attacked somewhere in a park or something. I don't remember where she was attacked. But as they're starting the surgery, there's this kind of dialogue between Dr. Derek Shepard and Preston Burke. And Preston Burke says, or something about the rape kit was negative, which right there, we all know as advocates, we're like, well, this is badly written. And then he goes on to say, this woman kicked his ass. We have a warrior on our hands. And it motivated them to do better on their operation, right? So, and that's a huge scene. Like it kicks off a series that has been on for 17 years. Nobody questioned it. Nobody deconstructed it. It just kind of sits there. So every year when I start over with that scene, I'm like, oh, still, it's still there. But it is something that we can see reinforced in multiple aspects of our lives. Other pieces of the perfect victim is how we expect them to behave. No questions, no complaints, no hesitation of any sort, just boldness and confidence, or on the opposing end, so distraught and so hysterical that at times the fact that they have utilized Rape Crisis Center or victim advocacy or counseling services is used as an argument to say, yes, what happened to them was real, and it got so bad they even had to go into the Rape Crisis Center. So that is not necessarily, instead of seeing that as a strength and a normal response to an abnormal situation, it gets weaponized whenever we reinforce that perfect victim. So,
and also, I think when this is reinforced, it also reinforces that the motive for a rape is sex. Sex is the weapon, but the motive is this deep underlying power issue, this hate toward females. It might not even be against that particular female or even males. This happens to men too. When military sexual assault is a whole nother conversation that we should probably do a webinar on, and bringing in those experts. But it's about power control, it's about domination, it's about subjugation, it's about all these other things than sex. So when we talk about when you said that, Crystal, about the one person who said, oh, they would never, sexual assault, rape me because of whatever, I think that's the reinforcement of societal misconceptions there. So
yeah, and Anastasia's reinforcing that over here in the chat. She said, I'm not worried because I'm not the type of person they look for with regards to human trafficking. So, and unfortunately, a lot of this perfect victim narrative is used to discredit victims. And it does contribute in many, many ways, shapes, and forms to the discrepancies we're seeing in conviction rates. So,
All we can control is our own thinking and our own responses and educate where possible. But it is something even us as advocates still have to work on, because we've all been impacted by certain myths with regards to rape culture. So that's such a deeply ingrained thing for all of us from the beginning. So it's something we constantly have to be unfolding in our mind.
Lizette put a really great comment. Lizette Hernandez. She said that I worked with a very calm 17-year-old who expressed her distrust in law enforcement, as this was not her first experience. The officer taking the report was very confused by her sense of calmness and assertiveness. So yeah, trauma shows up and or doesn't show up. It depends, and there's no one way. Yes, so Lizette, that's a really great
Yeah.
example.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
All right, so let's look at some change and shift in our language. And I think this is one of the ways that we're going to start making a difference. Younger people, we usually say this as children or adolescents, but this simple shift in our phrasing. Younger people are at the highest risk of sexual violence. And when we look at these new statistics with this new frame, we see that 54% of survivors fall in the age category of 18 to 34. And then the question becomes, what can we do for these folks? 12 to 17 is also another highly represented age. And then it does decrease 28%, 35 to 64, and then 3% 65 and over. I don't always fully agree with that last finding because, again, like I said earlier, we are talking about people that absolutely have a lot of their capacity to ask for help, whether they wanted it or not, taken away due to their status in terms of aging. So, and I especially worry about people with dementia and things like that that are fully reliant on caretakers. That this is often caretakers who are the perpetrators and the person causing harm, or it's systemic and being overlooked by a whole institution or organization. So we still have work to do there too.
And Krista, what I liked about that slide that you had up was that, yes, so that slide was just to kind of show, to give a picture of the sexual assaults. I know like when I talk to advocates or I'm doing, I still do back before COVID, and I kind of miss it. I can't wait till we can go back. But for Williamson County, so it's a Hope Alliance in Round Rock, Texas. I live in Williamson County, so would love to live in Austin. It's too expensive. But anyway, it's a whole nother webinar. Anyway, but in Williamson County, I would do presentations for their volunteers and their advocates. And the one that I did was cultural resonance and victim services. And we don't really talk about race, but we talk about all these other factors that contribute to this disparity and the marginalization and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing that we recognized is that as a whole, like the number of sexual assaults as a whole and the age, and I tell them the folks that we're going to be dealing with as adult, as sexual advocates are going to be the adult non-stranger sexual assault situation cases, right? So between 18 and, back then we were saying 18 and like 28 was something like that. It was around that age. But this here just kind of is evidence to the fact that these are a lot of cases come in this age group, right? Also, child cases are high as well. So I don't want anyone to think that, oh yeah, the children are safe now. No, those cases are still as high. It's just when you compare them together, a lot of cases, a lot of sexual assault cases are occurring with the age group 18 through 34. And so I think that's the true picture that I'm hoping that you all see here, is that it's happening, but those are the cases that aren't really reporting those survivors. Those are the survivors that fall through the cracks. Those are the survivors that, I've seen starting to fight back. They're doing things to fight back, to say, hey, you didn't treat me very well when I went to go report, or hey, advocates, y'all kind of dropped the ball here. So I'm actually kind of loving the fact that they're calling all of us on task. We need that. We need to reset. We were in a meeting the other day, and Lavinia Masters said it's about evolution. It's about us not getting comfortable in how we're offering services, but continuously looking to see how we can be better and do better. So again, I just wanted to thank you, Crystal. I just wanted to see, to point that out with this, not that we're not trying to say, oh yeah, child sexual assault is not, no, that's huge. That's high. But when we're looking at sheer numbers, the adult non-stranger sexual assault it's a high number. So Tarrant County, I know y'all are on the line. on the line. Oh my God, I'm sounding so old. Y'all are online here with us. So this was something, so back in the day, and I'm sorry, I forgot to put the site here. Tim Madigan, he was a reporter. I don't know if he still is, for the Star Telegram, I think it's called, in Fort Worth. This was back in 2008. I will say this before I get started. Tarrant County DA's office looks completely different now. There's a whole new DA. I was at a meeting with the governor's office task force. There was someone that was there from the unit. They have a unit assigned to adult sexual assault. Great things are happening in Tarrant County DA's office, right? So, but back in 2008, when other, whatever was happening then, they had a reporter that just wanted to kind of look, was interested. He had a 3-part series to dive into acquaintance rape, is what he was calling it. We called non-strangers, same thing. So what he found, one of the things that he kind of did is he wanted to see like how they get through the system and where's the barriers. So the one thing that I thought was really interesting that he did is it was in 2008, he looked at all the no build cases. Does everybody know what no build is? It's when they go to the grand jury, and then the grand jury, it's for felony cases in Texas. You have to go through that process. Okay, good. Somebody said yes. She's going to speak for all of you. I'm just kidding. If you don't know what that is, yeah, thank you. Yeah, let us know. We'll make sure and put that in there. So in 2008, 11% of all the felony cases were no build. So again, very low percentage were no build. But then when he compared the adult non-stranger cases, what he found out were that for that year, the adult non-stranger cases were no build 40% of the time. And as you read the article, he said the one common element that he saw or that he felt would make it that was consistent in the no build for the adult non-stranger is when alcohol was involved with the survivor, where she was drinking. So again, that is just a reality. This was back in 2008. So I just, again, want to reiterate that they have a whole new situation happen. And I don't even know what was going on back then. This was just an analysis of cases. I'm not saying anything bad was going on. I don't know. I don't live there, but this is just, I think, a good example of just kind of how these things happen across the state, right? So I just wanted to say that. And let me see, I think I see some questions in case someone is, okay. Someone asked if we could explain what no build means. So I'm going to attempt, but no build, and when there's a felony when there's a felony indictment, it has to go through a grand jury. In Texas, all the felony cases have to be approved or whatever through the grand jury so that you have the prosecutor's office, they go in and they present the case. The grand jury at that point will say, yes, let's let it go through the process, or nope, there's not enough evidence, we're going to no bill it. So it just dies at that point. Yes. So Sarah, thank you. Sarah Glenn said, this is a big reason why we now have the dedicated adult sexual assault unit in the DA's office. Yeah. I remember again, that meeting, and I cannot remember her name, and I'm going to go back and find it, but she was a prosecutor there. She's at one of our meetings for the governor's office sexual assault task force. And I reached out to her and said, I would love to talk to you. I'm so excited to hear this. And she said, absolutely, anytime. So anyway, I want to kind of find her name and just kind of talk to her about all this. But again, that was back then. And so, yes, so I'm sorry, Alexis Canfield, Lupe Lopez has just explained it way better than I did about what no build means. Yes, that's her, Kim. Yes, thank you. Oh my God, I'm gonna write that down here in a second. She was great. So, we'll move away from Tarrant County. And let's talk about, hey, Travis County. So this was really heartbreaking, y'all. So if any of you are football fans, I'm a college football fan. I'm A&M, Aggies all the way. I mean, I graduated from A&M, so it's always fun. Thanksgiving over here in Austin when we used to play. We don't play anymore. And then Crystal with her Texas Tech, we were like, who's that? I'm just kidding. Texas Tech is actually really good now. But either way, all that, I digress. Oh my gosh. So what happened back then? So I don't know if y'all remember Charlie Strong. He was the coach at UT back then when all this happened. And I just wanted to kind of uplift this. Charlie Strong. Okay, so when this happened, there was a situation where two football players were involved in a sexual assault on campus. Charlie Strong immediately took them off the team. He said he didn't, and he caught a lot of flack. They were like, wait a minute, it hasn't even gone through the process of, the criminal, they haven't even been convicted yet, none of that. He said it doesn't matter. That there's no space for that on my team. And I really love that about Charlie Strong. Charlie Strong is now was coaching, I think, in somewhere else, and now I think is going to the NFL. Either way, so but that case, right? I remember, and I at that point was a research fellow at the Institute of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault at UT Austin School of Social Work. So I remember like I can't remember her name, but she was the expert from IDVSA, the expert on expert testimony. And so she was working with them as they were getting this case through. But there was video evidence, y'all, of this sexual assault, these girls by the football players, and they ended up getting acquitted. So that was another gut punch for us. We thought, oh, everything's here. All the evidence is there. There's videos, there's everything. And they got acquitted. But anyway, so while on the stand, Jane Doe has said she consented to sex with Montrell Meehan, that was his name, the second suspect also awaiting trial in his room at the San Jacinto dormitory. She said that consent was withdrawn when Kendall Sanders showed up, but the two men forcibly had sex with her. Anyway, Jane Doe said she is 5'5", and fighting back against two football players was not a possibility. She said Sanders made statements to her like, "You're going to like it and you can leave when I'm finished." So again, this is something that plagues us everywhere when it comes to that. So this is one that was not no build. It went through, but in the courtroom process, this was the outcome. We were completely devastated.
And unfortunately, I've also seen cases with similar scenarios and situations where it has been posed back to the victim of, let this be a lesson. Even when several of the cases were no build, let this be a lesson about who you drink with, who you hang out with. What did you expect going back with these, people? So completely re-traumatizing. So.
Carletta Hayes said that she wants to recommend a book, Missoula. Oh gosh, I haven't read that, but I've heard of that, about multiple sexual assaults on campus and how campus regulations clash with state laws. Wow.
Yes.
That I have got to pick that up. It tells the stories of each woman in her case. Thank you for that recommendation. I'm going to pick that up.
And if you're looking for something Texas specific, Jessica Luther's Unsportsmanlike
Oh
Conduct,
gosh, yes.
which is our next slide. So.
All right, y'all. Baylor. Okay, let's talk about Baylor, McLennan County. So I know that all of you, I don't know if you remember, but a big case. Crystal, how many? Was it about 2-3 years ago? I can't remember what it was.
Been about 3.5 now. So.
Yeah, so it was this was one of those that really just kind of took just again, felt like just a kick in the gut, because we were following this case. It was a sexual assault. It was the fraternity president, and I can't remember which frat it was, but he was the president of a fraternity. Very nice looking guy, seemed well put together, came from probably a good family or whatever. And the victim, talk about the perfect victim. The victim, again, described herself as Christian. She was a virgin. She wanted to wait till she got married, all those things. And she was brutally raped. Thought she was going to die on her own vomit, was raped. As again, I don't have to get into all of the details. It was brutal. So through that process, she wanted to continue and push on to get some accountability, to get some justice. So it started out, again, went through the grand jury process. They didn't do the no bill. There's another word, and I'm sure Lupe knows that word, where it goes through, it's through the grand jury, they agree. And anyway, whatever. Sorry, y'all. I need to get caught up on my criminal justice words. But either way, there was an indictment for 4 counts of sexual assault, 4 felony counts of sexual assault. That was pled down to unlawful restraint, and he was given a $400 fine. That was really hard to take. TAASA made a statement, and I know that a lot of folks were like, why is TAASA doing that? We were like, we have got to protect survivors, and we have got to let them know that we are here and that we need to work together to be better. So Hillary Laborde, she was the prosecutor, very seasoned. She's done a lot of good work. And I found this quote from her, and I think it just kind of, again, just adds to that conundrum, right? So she says conflicting evidence and statements exist in this case, making the original allegation difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. As a prosecutor, my goal is no more victims. I believe that is best accomplished when there is a consequence rather than an acquittal. And how sad is that, that there was, for this brutal sexual assault, that there was the high possibility that it would be acquitted. So again, not kind of pointing fingers anywhere. This is the state of the state, as we called the name of the presentation. So anyway, I just thought that that was really telling and very sad. I don't know what the next slide is.
Freezing.
Okay, here we go, y'all. So before I do that, let me look at the chat real quick. Brief update for Tarrant County since the implementation. Oh, Alice. Okay, brief update for Tarrant County since the implementation of our sexual assault unit. The number of oh my gosh, went down from 31 to 16. That is so great. Oh my God, I love hearing that. Thank you, Allison, for sharing that. I knew when I saw that the DA or the prosecutor, I'm sorry, that was on that call that we had with the governor's office, I thought, oh my God, they're doing great things. This is so good to hear. Thank you so much.
And I think this is a great example of when we take an honest look at our gaps in service and we take away any blame or any defensiveness and just say, look at this data, look at what survivors are saying. Something needs to change. We see outcomes. As long as we're pushing back or defending or gaslighting survivors for not reporting, and passing the blame from organization or community response group to community response group, we keep getting the same outcomes, or the discrepancy is going to continue to grow. So, and that's the whole point of today's presentation is we have got to take a more honest look at what's going on. So,
absolutely. So, with what we've talked about so far, I wanted to Crystal and I wanted to get your thoughts, and feel free to take a moment to think about it or to put in the chat if you have already a reaction. Like, how do you feel about connecting? Because the way that I often refer to this is that we have this great dynamic of sexual assault, right? That comes with all the misconceptions, all the misinformation, all of the mishaps of when they disclose. And again, another thing is they don't who they're disclosing to. Again, according to IDVSA's latest study on sexual assault prevalence in Texas, they're first disclosing to friends and family. Those of us in this work know that is such a critical point. How we respond is so critical to their path moving forward. So when we see the other stat, which is over 90% did not report, again, there's some work for all of us to do when it comes to this. So what I wanted you all to think about and ponder and kind of, we'd like to know your thoughts is, what are your thoughts on connecting the gray dynamic of sexual assault to a criminal justice system that is very rigid and black and white? They're just not really, just kind of two ships passing in the night, kind of. I have hope hearing about Tarrant County. That is such beautiful news that they have made some adjustments, and wow, we're seeing some positive outcomes from that. So what are your thoughts on that? We'll start with the first one. What are your thoughts on how connecting the gray dynamics of adult non-stranger sexual assault to a very rigid black and white criminal justice system?
So our first is moving towards restorative justice, focus on repairing harm rather than retribution and blame. Defining consent well in our legislator, educating society on the realities.
Yeah, absolutely. All those things. Yeah, the jury education. Marla, are y'all able to do that in the San Marcos area? I know in Austin they used to do that. I'm not sure if that's happening anymore. Where they would bring in Austin back in the day, they would, under Liz Donegan, when she was the adult sex crimes sergeant, and then the DA back then, I don't know who that was, but anyway, back then they would bring in the advocates from SAFE to do an education on the jury. So great.
Grand jury education.
And even, the peers are the jury, jury as a whole. Someone
Yeah,
says,
Allison is sharing outcomes. To get good outcomes, we need to educate the community because the community ultimately becomes our jurors. So,
Mhm.
grand jury and trial.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, Lizette, so having a conversation about power and control and what that means. I
Mhm.
know that, when we we'll just like campus sexual assault, right? That's something that's really difficult. You think that's easy to talk about. No, it's happening. It's very pervasive, but it's very hard to talk about because we've had some folks or some variables that are confusing the whole, what is it? Not due diligence. Oh my God, yeah, I'm so sorry. It's Friday. Usually I'm better with my words. What is it when you want to make sure that the person who's accused has oh my God. Let's play that. What's that game called where you try to guess what I'm thinking? Oh my God. Anyway, so it's when the perpetrator needs to be given a yes, yes, it's something else. We're getting there. Anyway, sorry, y'all. It'll come to me later.
Are you
But
talking about where everybody needs to be given equitable resources at the campus level to um, defend themselves?
I'll just be honest. I'll just be frank. It's like, the men's rights group are saying due process. Yes, yes. Michael, due process. Due process. So yeah, due process is something that we as advocates, we as TAASA, we believe in. We think that's vital to all who are accused of whatever you're accused of, that there's due process. So that's the thing with campus sexual assault, though. That's where there's been some confusion is with the due process and how can we get that together. But I think the education of what that is, and I think us as advocates being able to say that we do support due process for anybody. That's kind of been twisted and confused in a lot of different ways for, who knows what reason, but yes, I just wanted to say that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the conversation about rural, and we wanted to find some case studies from rural, and we had a really hard time doing that because rural areas don't even have the specialized units or don't have access. There's still not enough law enforcement even working in those departments, attorneys, judges, and things like that. And there's not a lot of training on sexual assault. So, and it just rural areas even tougher in those situations. So.
Yes, Lupe says she totally agrees that there is a disconnect right now between agencies that help victims of sexual assault and law enforcement. The law is not broad enough to allow cases to be prosecuted on the victim just saying no. Sex assault agencies tell victims that rape is saying no. It's true, but it won't work. Yeah, there is a disconnect. Absolutely, Luba. That's the disconnect, right? It's the gray versus the this. And so someone said we need to maybe make the connection is maybe updating consent laws in Texas. Oh my God, have we had that conversation? So yeah, no, this is really great, y'all. Conversation. Thank you for sharing your information. Let's see. Kathy says I worked with a 17-year-old male who snuck out of his house to meet with somebody he met on Facebook. He was sexually assaulted, and the first thing he did when he got home was to tell his mother. It was great to see that he was able to speak with his mother. Yes, absolutely. Very hard for teenagers to speak. Oh my God, yeah, that is a great story.
And we've come such a long way from back in the day. You snuck out, or in my area, we have lots of lakes. So if you snuck out and met somebody out at the lake and something were happened to you and you were to be sexually assaulted, mom and dad were calling his mom and dad, and y'all were getting married. And a lot of people were forced, to marry people that had sexually assaulted them. So.
And Sarah has a good comment. She says, I think the due process on campus has been conflated to due process in a criminal trial. And you're right, they're separate. On a campus, it was preponderance of the evidence, whereas in a criminal trial, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So absolutely. Sit in city council meetings and advocate for mandatory prevention education in communities and PDs. Yeah, Anastasia, all of those things. Let's see. So conversation around behaviors are vital, but can still be used both ways, unfortunately. The difference is the behaviors of power and control are something we hear in every survivor. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. So yes, thank y'all for sharing all of this and adding to the richness of this conversation. So Wanted to switch gears just a little bit. I know we've been talking about the criminal justice system and how we can't seem to make the disconnect, the connection there, and all the evidence, and we talked about the stats. But I kind of want to switch gears, y'all, and I want to talk about advocacy now, right? What's the state of the state with advocacy? What's going on with us as advocates for those of us who are working at sexual assault programs and rape crisis centers? The one thing that we've seen historically is there is a lack of consistency, right? We can just across the board, a lack of consistency with even training. How are you onboarded at a sexual assault program when you start? What kind of training are you getting? And yes, we have minimum standards, but who is actually kind of going to check on those minimum standards, and how often? I know there is OAG's in charge of that, but so again, we're a huge state. And then the standard of care. What do we have? What level of standard of care and consistency do we have from county to county, from community to community? What does that look like? Now, I'm not saying that we have to standardize everything, but I think it's time for us to start to have a conversation as advocates, as sexual assault programs across the state. We're all committed to ensuring that sexual assault survivors, again, especially the adult non-stranger sexual assault survivors, because again, as we just saw, those are very high numbers happen in that age group. Those are the ones that are not reporting. Those are the ones that are flying under the radar. And so their offender remains undetected, right? So we have to begin to bring them, help them, support them in any way that we can. And when we start to have a standard of care, of course, you run into the risk of just kind of treating everybody the same. We know that everybody's unique. So either way, so I just wanted to kind of have that conversation about, what you all thought of this, because for example, there's no statewide mandate. Crystal brought this up to me yesterday, that there's no statewide mandate for hospitals to call an advocate. I mean, something as simple as that, right? Because in TAASA, we're working with Texas A&M. So last legislative session, there's two things that we're very proud of. Really, we did really good, y'all. It was a very good session. But one of the good things that we did is we upped rape crisis center funding. It's called the SAPCS state. So for those of you that are getting that are sexual assault program, so 2019 leg session ended in May. In August, you all had money in the bank or in your wards of the work that we did to get you all more money, because we know how hard it is to do the work, and that you all were letting us know we don't have enough resources to really fill the gap with the services and counseling and advocacy and all those different things. So your elected officials, they all voted together to do that. It was a great situation. But the other thing that we had was, then we had the governor's office task force. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And that was a really great thing. But the other thing was the telehealth, right? So we were able to get some money to start a telehealth program in Texas, because we know that in rural areas, and I'm from rural Texas, so I'm always looking out for rural Texans. I grew up there. When I started at TAASA and was working in Austin, I was like, this is interesting that all these resources are here. I used to live when I grew up about 45 minutes away, and I would never see those, again, just 45 minutes away from Austin, and never had access to all these wonderful, rich resources. So rural Texas, I grew up there, so I'm here for you. I'm always making sure that we have that. So anyway, so telehealth was to go to rural areas to make sure that if there's not a SANE, but they have a clinic or a hospital, that we would have, A&M would have a hub of SANEs that could be able to make that connection, so that folks sexual survivors could get their forensic exams. But so we teamed up with A&M, and so they picked some sites, and I have to say there was no sexual assault advocates there. There was nothing. And so the hospital was like, oh, we just call, these folks, and those folks were just, anyway, there was no standard of care. And then another spot, they were like, oh, we don't call anybody. So again, there's no mandate or consistent for hospitals to even call an advocate when this happens. It might be an educational thing. Does it need to be a law? I don't know, but it's something that we are also exploring at TAASA. Crystal, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're going to cover it in this next slide, so I'll just let you keep going.
So I wanted to bring up really quickly the Sexual Assault Survivor Task Force. I'm so glad that Nicole is here. So another, like I mentioned that it was HB 1590, I think. I always get that wrong. I don't know why, but either way, Donna Howard, she was the person that put together TAASA, and Texas CAC worked with her office to put together this legislation so that we could finally for once get everybody, all the people together so that we can look at what is happening, right? Where are the disconnects? How can we connect them? Where are we doing things wrong? Where are we doing things right? In a whole coordinated effort to do this consistently across the state. So we have some tremendous leadership at the Texas governor's office that is leading this effort, in Hillary England, Nicole Martinez, Francesca Garcia, Amy Snidey. I mean, to be honest, when I think about how they organized it, I mean, talk about herding cats. Like, that was their job. They should have just told them, here, y'all are gonna have to herd these cats. They figured that out and came up with a really great intentional process and stages of how we're looking at all this information. So the state auditor's office, we just kind of went through that process of reviewing that. Survivors gave a really great, we have a sexual assault survivor group that gave us some really great information. And in that, as they were giving us the recommendations based on the state auditor's report, y'all, I'm just going to be honest. What I took away from that is that as advocates, we need to do better. I mean, they were giving recommendations like, would like to know what my options are when I get to the hospital, would like to know in real time when I'm encounter with the system, what are my options? I'd like to have an advocate there. And I'm like, oh my God, that is something that we have in place. So again, not an indictment on anybody, but I really want us to, as sexual assault advocates in the community, I want to try to put together some conversations for us so that we can make sure and be consistent with how we provide the level of care that they deserve. And again, there's just sometimes, you're in between, maybe the hiring is not all there, or sometimes you're like, oh, we've got to beef up the sexual, and that's okay. We can help you with that. Because there are times too that I've gone to different locations in Texas that are dual, and I'll say, how's the sexual assault side of the house going? And, oh, we don't really have that many assaults, and that's okay because they don't have the staff. So I've tried to work through that with them to say, how can we help you maybe build and do some outreach and do some assessments, on what's happening and so again, everyone is just super busy. Everyone's doing the best they can with the limited resources. But I just wanted to say that I feel like as advocates, we can do better, and we want to start having those conversations, with you all, with TAASA. We fail to. All of us, can always do better. I shouldn't say we failed. We just need to, as Lavinia Masters, evolve. Let's kind of assess and move forward. So that was one of the things that I did want to bring up that really broke my heart when I heard they were great. They're smart, brilliant women, and they were great recommendations. But at the heart of it, I was like, ooh, that's already in place and we need to do better. That's what I got out of it, just personally speaking as the CEO of the advocacy organizations representing sexual assault programs. I was like, ooh, that's on me. Let's do this. We're going to be better. So the other thing that I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and I wanted to tell you all as sexual assault advocates, those of you from a dual agency that has a sexual assault program, those of you from standalone rape crisis centers, we are very unique in that we are protected by Texas law, right? To be in the room when a sexual assault survivor presents at the hospital. We are very unique in that. Also, more importantly, the sexual assault survivor under Texas law has the right to have a sexual assault advocate present, right? That's a part of their crime victims' rights as laid out by Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, chapter 56.351, as is on the slide. So again, I need us to really, if you've got to, take this slide, print it out, pass it out to everybody in your communities. There's two things that need to happen, right? So sexual advocates are statutorily protected to be present in the exam room, right? But you have to satisfy two things. You have to be a staff or a volunteer from a sexual assault program as defined by chapter 420. And that's all of you that are in dual agencies, standalone rape crisis centers. And not an or, and so you have to be affiliated either through staff or as a volunteer with that program. And they define the program in Texas law. And you have to be trained by a sexual assault training program. So I'll just give an example of, I've been talking about Hope Alliance this whole time. They are a certified training program. So I, as a volunteer, then am an advocate that's protected to be in that exam room because they are, through the OAG's office, they are considered a sexual assault training program. I'm a volunteer. I've trained under their 40-hour training. Now I can be a protected advocate. So because OAG does not certify individual advocates, I think that's a confusion. A lot of folks think, oh, I'm not affiliated with the sexual program, but I'll go take this 40-hour training from Hope Alliance or San Antonio or wherever, and I now am a certified advocate. You're not, unless you're a volunteer or you are a staff, right? Because OAG does not certify individuals, they certify programs. You need to be connected to a program. So I think that's a mass confusion that has been out there. And that's something that we've seen as we're trying to establish advocates across the state for these remote areas where there is no sexual assault program. And we're having other programs come in and help us to fill that gap, San Antonio being one of them. So the Texas statute protecting a sexual assault survivor's right to a sexual assault advocate during the medical forensic exam. So I talked about the where it is in law that the crime victim or the sexual assault survivor has that right to have somebody in there, and also the government code that defines the advocate. It defines the advocate described in the Texas. It defines the advocate, sorry, that is described in the crime victim's rights, right? So it's an individual may act as an advocate for survivors of sexual assault for the purposes of subchapter H, right? So code of criminal, if the individual has completed a sexual assault training program. So that's basically reiterating what I said. So I just wanted to put that out there because I see this as an opportunity also. We have seen where human trafficking cases, child sex trafficking cases are, they've been there and we're starting to become aware of them. There are a lot of brilliant human trafficking organizations around the state that are doing amazing work, and a lot of them are funded by the governor's office as well. There's the child sex trafficking, there's some adult trafficking. OAG does some of that work, and everyone works together. So I'll say this: sexual assault programs, there are some out there that are actually doing this, like Hope. Gosh, yeah, it's Friday, like I said, in Lubbock. Voice of Hope, Lubbock. They are doing some really great work. They're working with their partners on the ground. I know there's someone here from Dallas that does human trafficking work. So I just wanted to say that I would love for us all to coordinate and collaborate. Like sexual assault programs, a lot of them are becoming up to speed on that, but we also are in the same community with human trafficking organizations that are on it. They've got it. So a way that we can work together, I think, is by getting with your local sexual assault program and coordinating with them, so that as they're in the hospital room, because another thing that I've heard, and I'm sure you all have heard this too, human trafficking victims present later as a human trafficking victim, but first present as a sexual assault victim in the hospital. That's a story, anecdotal, that I've been hearing across the state, is that they're treating them as sexual assault survivors and they find out it was actually human trafficking. So then they're wanting to connect with the human So again, that's just one way. We can have another conversation about that. But for sexual assault programs, advocates, this is where we are. This is our duty. This is what we're supposed to do. So I know that you all are doing that. So so you know that we are statutorily protected to be there. The victim has the right, and here's how it's laid out. So sorry, I spent too much time on that, but I just wanted to present, here's the information, but also here's the opportunities that we can connect with, because again, I know human trafficking and sexual assault programs are working together, and this is another way that we can actually do that work together. Sexual assault advocates, because they're protected under statute, can be in the exam room, and they can actually then do the warm handoff to the human trafficking experts, the community on the ground that are doing that work and working together in that way. That's just my 2 cents. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think this is something that came up in terms of the standard of care and the inconsistencies we're seeing there is sometimes people are not going into the exam room at all, and they're waiting until way after to even call the advocate, or the advocate just drops off a packet and goes. And then in other situations, the wrong people are going in, and that's a violation of the survivor's rights, but also can affect the outcome going forward. So us getting all on the same page is that was something that it's becoming really important to us at TAASA, and I'm glad Rose could talk about that. So we have one slide left, and we have just a few minutes left in our webinar, and I'm going to go through this with y'all pretty quickly, we want to have more conversations about community healing, recognizing that one incidence of sexual violence has this rippling effect. Community members who are hearing about this, seeing this, hearing this on the radio on their drive to work. You know, I have two children, and we consistently talk about sexual violence in my home. They hear my webinars and all that stuff, so they know what I do, and we have age appropriate conversations. But every now and then, you know, we'll be going to school or something like that, and a story comes on the radio that we weren't prepared to process or we weren't prepared to talk about. And not every family has a parent who is working in the anti-sexual violence movement who knows how to have age appropriate comments or conversation about that. So it ripples out. We concentrate a lot on survivors' self-care, but a lot of times what they need is also community healing. When they have been tried in the court of public opinion, it's really difficult. I myself as an advocate, there have been many cases where I have wanted to jump on that keyboard and just let my mouth go, right? And it doesn't help. Also, I have protected confidential information. I'd like to keep paying my bills next month, right? So you can't do that. I've heard law enforcement also share that they have seen stuff on social media or on their law enforcement Facebook pages, and they're like, I'm so angry. I know these things because we're actively doing this, and our hands are just tied right now. And we want to explain we have confidential things that we cannot say, right? And how do we help communities as a whole start to heal, start to understand more, and move towards a place of, post-trauma growth. So first things first, I want to talk about is our mindset. And how do we get into a growth mindset and get rid of we have always done it this way, right? Our center does it this way. We're not changing it. And we start to look at new things that can bring healing to the people who come to us for services, the people that don't, and then our community as a whole. So we want to recognize that sexual violence causes both trauma and grief. And we often don't talk about the grief that comes with changing our mindset and having our sense of safety, our sense of, I live in this wonderful community. I live in a community up until, about 10 years ago, my dad still had his truck parked outside with his keys in it, and nobody was going to take Little Red, and he kept his keys out there, right? That changed in our community, and it was a big big shift when we realized we can't leave our keys in the car anymore. And then we come to bigger issues around sexual violence and just shifting our mindset to the realities, right? And that's difficult for us to do as a community. And there's a lot of grief and a lot of sense of loss in our sense of safety. Define our community needs, assets, and gaps. Include survivors in that process, and don't use our communities as research guinea pigs. We do a lot of community assessments. We need to be doing those in a trauma-informed manner, ethically, and using what we find and talking to people that can give us great information. A lot of times we go to high profile stakeholders and we forget the community as a whole. And what we found in public health is when you overuse your community and you start to give them all these community assessments, nothing changes, or you leave when the grant funding is over and there's no sustainability, they will push back and no longer want to participate in your interventions, and they will stop trusting you as a service provider. And we've seen communities that have had a lot of healing to do once this has happened. Advocate for a trauma-informed lens in all areas of your community. Talk about trauma-informed schools. That's something we do. Also, let's talk about trauma-informed businesses. Let's talk about trauma-informed news coverage. Like, when's the last time we've come and sat down and talked with our reporters locally about how to cover sexual assault, what to say, what to write? We're usually having those conversations after the story has come out. I know I've done that myself as an advocate. Really? Did we really have to run this picture? Did we really have to say it this way? Let's do that before. Let's do that before things happen. And it makes it a little bit easier when mistakes happen, too. And then explore and support holistic healing practices, recognizing survivors as authorities of their own life. They are their best decision makers. We're letting go of that whole concept of we're the voice for the voiceless, and pass the mic. Let them speak and let them tell us what needs that they have. So All right, so that is the end of our content. We have about 5 minutes left today. Let's see. Rose, is there anything in the chat box that you want to share out for
Oh,
us?
there's some good stuff in this chat box. Lots of good
Most
stuff.
active chat boxes we've seen in a while, so I'm
Yeah.
excited you're all engaging with us.
I have learned a lot today just in this chat box. Oh my God. Man, there's so much. I encourage you all to read the chat box because I'm catching up with it. I'm like, wow, this is good stuff. Yeah, there's a lot in the chat box. A lot of folks are just, kind of commenting on the, the role that we were talking about earlier, and then kind of like even the distinction between victim services at law enforcement and sexual assault program. I know when I was doing hospital accompaniment work, I'd get there. Oftentimes I'd get there and there was already like someone wanted to report, and I'd get there and there's a victim services was there from PD, and then there was the nurse, and then I'd come in, and the nurse was just really great to say, this is Rose, blah, blah. So, but I would come and introduce myself, and I would say, hi again. Yes, my name is Rose. I'm not with the hospital. I'm not with law enforcement. I am from the community group, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of how I would distinguish myself as an advocate. And the victim services person would be in the room initially just to build a rapport. When the actual exam was going on, they were actually oftentimes the nurse would have them leave and let the advocate stay in, because again, statutorily protected to be able to stay in there. So yeah.
All right. Do we have any last questions, comments, burning desires? Can't leave this webinar without sharing this with Crystal and Rose.
Someone
right.
asked about the PowerPoint, so that's just I just saw that somewhere in the
Yeah,
chat.
we'll work on the PowerPoint and condensing that down to a PDF and getting that sent out. Some of the resources we mentioned today, DPS has a wealth of knowledge. Like I said, our data, a lot of our data and statistics did come from their yearly crime report. Those are published 1 year after, so we actually are current through 2019. If you want to go in and look at those fascinating information about all crime that happens in Texas, but the different ways they break it down, lots of usable information to have these conversations with your community. So. Right.
Oh, nice. Somebody said, feel free to reach out if you want to discuss rural. Nice. Oh, yay, Highland Lakes. Awesome. Thank you, Laura. We will.
Or we might have you back for a webinar. You never know.
Yes. Yeah, thank y'all so much. It was Friday. I apologize for some of the, shouldn't even, but anyway, I apologize for not, again, the words were escaping my mind today. I've got grants due, y'all, sorry. Lots of things happening, but I'm very excited. Crystal, thank you for inviting me to do a presentation. I haven't done one in a while, and I'm really excited to do this. So, and thank you all for joining. There was a lot of you here on a Friday, and we really appreciate you. Please know TAASA is here. Our job is to be here for you all. And I just want to offer us up as program support team, especially. They are there out in the field, but anyone at TAASA, we are here for you all. We want to do better together, and whatever we can do to help that, we're here to do that.
All right, and then just to close up as a reminder, we will not be having webinars until after the executive director's conference on February 9th and 10th. So our webinars will not disrupt that big conference, because we know a lot of our audience is going to be participating in that. And then we want y'all to have that opportunity to learn. There's going to be some amazing speakers with that. If you haven't done so, reach out to also get registered for that, as well as participate in our Capital Days coming up. Those are all going to be happening in the first 2 weeks of February. So we're going to hold webinars till the last part of the month, but keep watching your email. They'll come out through the regular training mail out that we do once a month. They just will come a little bit later so we can have time to do all the other amazing things. I wish we were all at the Capitol together, but I'm really excited to keep going forward. Thank you for being here. If you need anything, please reach out to us.
Happy Friday, y'all. All right. Have you stopped recording, Crystal?